I think the last time we sat here and had this exchange, I wasn't sure honestly what it was going to be, but after doing what I guess will ultimately be episode 1 or is already episode 1, um I feel like we might be onto something for a couple of reasons. I didn't necessarily think that. Well, I knew creativity was a part of our everyday lives. I wasn't sure that we'd be interested in, particularly in the content and something around it. But the feedback, the reception, kind of makes me feel like this is something that like we can keep doing. And I think as long as I feel like there's interest in these words hit somebody's ear and it resonates in some capacity, I will continue to do it. As always, though, I mean, now that I know that we're here, I want to do something that I always start off these conversations with, and just this idea of mindfulness, where we just take the next 10 seconds and just focus on our breath. So I'd prefer your eyes closed. You don't feel necessarily compelled to, but I think it'll help with the exercise. Starting now. We're here. It feels a little. I feel a little lighter. Um, and I like to always follow that up with a something to kind of spark the brain to get it ignited and going. Uh, and just like the last time, I'm trying to think of a good brain teaser to kind of start this one off with. All right, I got something. What is always in front of you, but you can never see it? What is always in front of you, but you can never see it? I'll let that marinate for a little bit before I answer it, and hopefully I can answer it before we get to the end of this. But today's conversation is going to be a little interesting. I want to talk about one thing in particular. I know the whole topic last time we spoke was just purely about creativity, and it will always be about that. But something specific to creativity that I want to talk about is just this idea of whether or not you see yourself as a creative. Do you recognize your own creativity? And then are these does this come up in conversation, like in your everyday conversation? Do you ever think or you're talking to somebody and the word creativity comes up? Do you identify with it? Is it something that say, no, I am living in my creativity. I'm my creative self in this particular moment. Are these conversations a part of the discussions that you're having? And I'm asking because one of the challenges with putting this together is like figuring out if people really care. Um, and because I'm associated with this idea of creativity, it's almost natural for it to come up when I'm talking to people. And I would generally ask them, do, do you see yourself as a creative? Are you creative? And for the most part, the reaction is always like, "Oh, I don't necessarily think that I am," especially if they're not necessarily living in their creative self. In a sense, I remember last time we talked about if it doesn't showcase itself in the arts, we don't necessarily see ourselves as creative beings. And we kind of debunked that the last time, but I want to expand upon that because there's a lot of super uber creative people out there that necessarily don't see themselves as creative beings. And so when I would ask that question, do you see yourself as a creative, or how does your creativity manifest itself? Is always a blank stare, and they'll think about it like, I don't necessarily think I'm creative. You have those that don't recognize their creativity, and then on the other hand, you have individuals who were maybe once really creative and are no longer kind of living in that same space, so they feel like they've lost their creativity. And I want to focus on the latter first. This idea of losing your creativity. To me, creativity is like energy, and the law of conservation of energy is simple. Creativity cannot be, or energy cannot be created or destroyed. And if it is in fact true that creativity is energy, then creativity cannot be created or destroyed. It's there. It exists. It could be in a rest state with all the potential, but at some point it's going to transform into kinetic energy, right? Until you use it. But the idea that it is lost, or if it goes unused, it dissipates or depletes, I think that's false. It's not one of those instances where it's use it or lose it scenario, right? This is not necessarily that. And I want to speak to that because if we redefine creativity and we don't see it as the arts, not saying it doesn't showcase itself, because that's what we traditionally know it as, but if we just look at it as approaching life in a way where we introduce this idea of innovation, we talked about intuition turning into awareness, and then turning and using that to introduce our imagination to come up with things. When's the last time where you were imaginative? When's the last time that you did something and that made yourself smile because you never thought of doing it that particular way? Usually what I would do is ask the person who I'm talking to, I'll step back a second and I'll say something like, describe what you're wearing. And then they'll go through the description. Oh, this is this and this is that. And I'll follow up by saying, well, why did you put that together in that particular way? You're like, oh, I was feeling a certain way. I was in a certain mood. And this color kind of speaks to my mood. It's a little brighter. And that's important because in that moment, they're making a connection. The last time I talked about this idea again about intuition being the first impression, and then awareness to establish a connection, and then your imagination to expand upon the possibilities. So in that moment, they recognized the feeling that they had, and they wanted to create a way to showcase that feeling to the world. And we talked about our five senses, and then taking those things, color that you can recognize via sight, that triggers a feeling, and they wanted to give off a feeling. So when they picked a certain color, in reality, it was their creative brain saying, hey, you can share this feeling with other people through this color. And that's one way of being creative. Another way, it's kind of how they style themselves. For a lot of people, they might wear certain things that either one kind of showcase their personality. And that can come in multiple different forms, right? I've seen people wear funky hats, colorful ties, colorful socks. Some people enhance their look or style with accessories. And I think that's creativity. And it's so much so an art in that particular sense that there are people who are personal stylists. They are designers because they've taken that idea of dressing themselves and turn it into something that they can share with the world. Now, does that mean all of us have that skill set? Sure, but not all of us necessarily want to pursue that. For a lot of us, that's not how our creativity takes shape. But that doesn't mean when we put ourselves together, that's not an example of our own creativity. Another place that creativity might show itself is in the kitchen. If you cook for yourself, right? I remember once in the pandemic, or a few times in the pandemic, I would go into my refrigerator and I'd see leftovers from meals before, or things that were unused, and then using my creative brain to figure out how can I take what I have here and put it together into a meal that I know my family would enjoy. And that would be my challenge for myself. And sometimes you're limited by multiple things, and it could be constraints that are immediately obvious to you, and other times it's not. But there's opportunities there for you to kind of showcase your creativity. And once you start to recognize like that creativity exists within you, because it does, at that point, now you'll start to challenge yourself to let it show itself in other ways. And then you start to ask yourself, what are my passions? What am I interested in? What where do I get enjoyment from? What do I think is fulfilling to me? And then once you make the connection to those two things, it's like, hey, I know I'm creative and I know I like this thing. How can I merge or mesh the two or marry the two so that it innovates or evolves into something else? And I think if you do it even in its simplest form, I think once you see it happen for the first time, it triggers something in you to say that, oh, one, I can do this. I've just validated this proof of concept where I've proven to myself that not only I can be creative, it's satisfying. And I think that's when you'll notice a turning point in just one, your approach, how you recognize creativity, and what it takes to kind of bring it to life in your own little way. And it takes practice and constant practice. But if you do it enough for a long period of time, it becomes second nature. You don't have to think as hard. You don't have to think as much. I think for me, I've been doing this creativity thing for such a long time, or at least consciously, that in moments, it just happens and I don't think about it. And it'll take somebody else to kind of see it for me to realize that, hey, that was a creative moment. And it has become so frequent that sometimes I feel like I take it for granted. But when I realize that my gift is, again, when the people around me kind of recognize it as well and remind me of that skill. And even in my household, my lady would tell me all the time, it's like, hey, solve this. And what she's ultimately saying is, hey, that creative brain of yours, use it for a real life implementation. And I see it as a challenge because I smile and then my brain starts to go and it'll go through these processes. Sometimes they're out loud, sometimes they're not. But I go through what I call my Rain Man, and I sit there and I think about it, and it's kind of the same approach when I get called to innovate for these companies. I sit there and I try to solve the problem in the best way I know possible that doesn't require too much external effort. And it could be as simple as grabbing a thread and needle. It could be glue. It could be tape. It doesn't have to be this complex thing. But it always starts off from something simple. I ask myself, like, well, all right, what is the best way for me to solve this? And then I think through that idea, like, all right, maybe I could do it this way. Maybe I could do it this way. And then I go through this iterative process and until ultimately, and iteration is fast iteration too. A lot of it happens in my brain. And then when I hit a solution that I think is viable, at that point is when I'll now take actual pieces and try to stick things together and cut things here and poke there and twist there, and until ultimately a solution kind of presents itself, something that's actually tangible. Now, not everybody's like that. Well, I think we all are like that. It's just something we need to practice. And I think my challenge to you is to allow yourself to go through those iterative steps to solve the problem, and think less of what you have available to you in the sense of solutions, and just think about, how do I want to solve this? Like, what would be the ideal solution for this? If a toy is missing a wheel, like, I know it needs to be round because that's how a wheel is designed, and it's supposed to function to allow the free flow without any friction, so a frictionless motion. What do I have that's round? It can't be that, because that might be too big. I need something smaller. Well, how small? And then you start to make associations to things like if you kind of go inside yourself and think about, all right, what do I know that's round, that's this size? And then you'll start to notice multiple things come to your mind. Then you'll narrow it down to something. Well, I need something that's round, and has a hole in it for the axle. Then you might find something that the size you want without the hole. Then you go into this next step where it's like, well, what can I use to kind of make the hole? And then ultimately you're going to come up with a solution. And I did a simple example for a couple reasons. One, to kind of make it more real life. But two, this can be incorporated in any type of profession, right? Whatever you do on a daily basis. When I was in a previous life, I was a developer, and there's a few tasks that I did that was kind of redundant, and I decided to, because I remember doing the same thing over and over every day, and I was like, there's a way to automate this, and this was years ago, and I built this desktop application that would do everything that I needed to do for the first 4 hours of my day, and it would do it in, I kid you not, about 5 minutes. It took me a while to write it, and I maybe over a course of a week, and because I did that, I was able to, as I said, do 4 hours worth of work in 5 minutes, just because I was able to tap into my own creativity, and then leverage it, right? And that's why I say creativity can showcase itself in many different ways. And one of the things I also mentioned was this idea that my creativity personally doesn't necessarily showcase itself in the arts. It's technology and innovation. And I just gave you an example of how that, a real life example of that. But it doesn't matter what your profession is. You can be a lawyer, you can be a doctor, you can be an accountant, you could be a clerk, you can be a bartender, that is now a mixologist that is known for their unique cocktails, how they craft them, and all these things. And I think if we take a creative approach to our own existence, I think we can start seeing a more colorful world. And ultimately, I think that is the goal, right? I always think about this movie when I think about creativity, Limitless. And it took a pill for him to kind of experience these things like this, seeing the world from a heightened level, being able to consume life the way he did in this particular movie. I can't remember the name. I could visualize, I could see him if I close my eye. I just can't remember his name. But that's how I think that is achievable, because I've seen it in my own life. And like I said, it honestly takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot to do it the first time. It doesn't take a lot, but to keep doing it and consciously. Because to be honest, life itself is already complicated as is, right? So to add this additional layer of complexity, a lot of us, we just don't have the bandwidth to do it. And I don't necessarily blame you. It's like, I don't want to have to think, right? It hurts sometimes to think. Like, my head hurts already. Like I've heard people say, I want a job that I don't have to think. And I always find that interesting, because I always see it from, I guess I ultimately want to get to that same end goal, but I want to do it creatively. I want a complex job that I can leverage my creativity or use my creativity to simplify it to the point where I'm excited because I can see my creativity kind of ease me through it. And it's like I said, it's easier said than done. But it is possible. And we just have to want it. Like you just have to want to tap into your creativity. We started off this conversation saying that creativity is not lost. So, and we've established that as human beings, we're innately creative. So it's just kind of reconnecting with that creativity and understanding like, hey, it's like you as in creativity are vital to me just as much as my sight is, my taste, my hearing, my sense of touch. Creativity is a part of what is just as human as those things are to us, right? And I think that's how we should start approaching. And then to the point where if we were to have this conversation, if I were to ask you randomly, hey, are you creative? I want your response to be, no, yes, I am. I am extremely creative, uncontrollably creative. And once you start and you build up that momentum of creativity, I think you'd be surprised of not only the things you accomplish, but the way you go about accomplishing it. If ultimately we want to enjoy life, and I think creativity amplifies that experience. But it is a conscious effort. And creativity is in you. You now know you can't lose it. And it's hard to visualize it unless it actually leaves your body and it manifests into something else. And that's where this idea of conservation of energy, again, where it's like it transformed from one thing to the next. And I want to make sure that we all get an opportunity to see that transformation manifest, to see what your creativity is like in real life, something tangible that you can actually feel, you can actually touch, you can actually see. Some cases you can taste. And when it happens for the first time, which it shouldn't be the first time for anyone, but a conscious realization that it's actually happening, you'd be surprised how impactful it is to your approach on life, your approach to work, your approach to family, relationships. I think creativity is one of those things that it's like the gift that keeps on giving. But I don't want to stretch this out more than it needs to be. If you've ever felt as if though you're not creative, I'm here to tell you that you are. If you've ever felt that you've lost your creativity, I'm here to tell you you can't. I think now more than ever is a great time to start reconnecting with your creativity, leaning in on your intuition, and then experiencing this rebirth into this creative life. And I think you'll be proud of yourself for it, and life itself is going to feel more meaningful. I think this might be episode 2. More as I talk and we're having these experiences, and it's now, I guess, becoming a reality that This will ultimately be, I guess, a podcast, and we'll continue to have these conversations, and I will continue to look forward to them, however frequent they might come out. But I'm excited about the future. And that is the answer to the question we started this conversation off with. What is always in front of you, but you can never see? The future. As always, continue to be great. Continue to be creative. Continue to innovate, and continue to leave your mark on the world. The podcast is titled NOM, the Creative Conduit. And every time you hear the word NOM, nobody truly knows what it means. But in reality, it is the letters NOM, which is the abbreviation for the Latin phrase non omnis moriar, which translates to not all of me will die. Continue to live so all of you never dies. Thank you.